Ben Carson is officially running for president in the Republican primaries. And for those who have not seen this guy in action, allow me to introduce you to who I believe is one of the silliest, most ridiculous far-right lunatics on the planet. Now, a little background info on Ben Carson before we totally smear him. This guy actually has a very inspiring story. He grew up in not the best circumstances around him. He lived in a poor single-mother household in the inner cities of Detroit and Boston. However, Ben Carson, he stayed focused on his studies, and he was eventually able to find his way out of those terrible conditions. He became a world-renowned neurosurgeon as he directed the first successful separation of Siamese twins joined at the back of the head. So, you know, when you hear all of these amazing things that Ben Carson was able to accomplish, it leaves you dumbfounded at just how politically clueless this guy is. So on that note, let us proceed to the smearing. Now, obviously, as a Republican, this guy is going to have some very hardcore conservative beliefs. However, Ben Carson, I believe, is just extremely stubborn on all of these issues. He has a clear set of very far-right loony principles that he sticks to no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the evidence is which disproves his claims. And that's what makes watching him hilarious. He will stick by his beliefs at all costs, no matter how ridiculous they are. He is absolutely, positively embarrassed at social issues.
You think they have control over their sexuality?
Absolutely.
You think being gay is a choice?
Absolutely.
Why do you say that?
Because a lot of people who go into prison straight, and when they come out, they're gay. So did something happen while they were in there? Ask yourself that question.
Never go to prison, and you know there's a whole theory of dominance.
Wait a minute. I said a lot of people who go in, come out. Are you denying that that's true?
I am not denying that that's true, but I am denying that that's as a basis of understanding homosexuality.
If, in fact, that is the case, then it obviously thwarts what you just said.
What? What? But that makes zero sense. So because people go into prison claiming they like the opposite sex, and they leave claiming they like the same sex, well, I'll be. Being gay must be a choice. No, just stop. You don't know all the circumstances of the millions of homosexuals in this country, and I'm sure the hundreds of thousands of homosexuals that have gone to prison. You don't know what they went through in that hellhole, so please just stop. Did you forget about the large number of gays that have openly liked the same sex since they were born? But no, the remaining number of homosexuals had to wait to come out of the closet because fools like you put social pressure on them to not be different and to not be who they really are because it makes people like Ben Carson feel uncomfortable. Now, Ben Carson, to his credit, does support medicinal marijuana use, but not recreational casual use. But on issues that are many times linked to the Bible, such as abortion, gay marriage, Ben Carson is an absolute joke, using brazen logic like the train of thought of, well, since they go to prison straight and come out gay, it must be a choice. Yes, using brazen logic such as that to back up his ridiculous opinions on many social issues. Now let's continue with this Ben Carson montage of ignorance. Now, Ben Carson is largely in line with the rest of the Republican Party on economic issues. So let's watch a Fox News host, Chris Wallace, going to challenge Ben Carson on his ridiculous proposal of a flat tax on every individual in the country. Check it out.
One of the pillars of your economic program is a flat tax. How would that work?
Well, I like the idea of a proportional tax. That way you pay according to your ability. And I got that idea, quite frankly, from the Bible, tithing. You make $10 billion a year, you pay $1 billion. You make $10 a year, you pay $1 million. You get the same rights. That's pretty darn fair, if you ask me. Now, some people say it's not fair because, you know, the poor people can't afford to pay that dollar. That's very condescending. You know, I grew up very poor. I've experienced every economic level. And I can tell you that poor people have pride, too. And they don't want to be just taken care of. And also, if everybody is paying, it makes it very difficult for these politicians to come along and raise taxes. It's easy to raise it on 1% or 2% or 5%. It's very difficult to raise it on 100%.
But, Doctor, here is the problem. with a flat tax in the real world. According to the Tax Policy Center, to raise the same amount of revenue we do now, the tax rate would have to be in the low to mid 20% range.
Wrong.
Low and middle income families would get a big tax hike, while wealthy families would actually get a big tax cut.
That's actually not, I don't agree with that assessment. Let me put it that way.
Again, as you see in that clip, it goes back to Ben Carson's hilarious stubbornness that I talked about. When he is presented with facts, he just wants to outright deny them. He outright denies the reality that's presented by Chris Wallace there. I mean, and kudos to Chris Wallace. That was actually a very good interview done by him. But yeah, he just completely denies the facts. These are statistics from the Tax Policy Center, which is a largely nonpartisan organization. And he says, nope, I don't believe it. I don't agree with facts. But look at what he says towards the middle of that clip there. Well, you know, people say this is going to hurt the poor. That's condescending. Yeah, I don't think poor people like getting fair taxes they can actually afford because they're prideful. They'd rather maintain their pride than stay out of poverty and keep enough money to survive by getting fair taxation. Just ridiculous train of thought there by Ben Carson. And Chris Wallace presented some great facts there, and I largely agree with that position on the flat tax. If you tax the average poor person who makes $20,000 a year, you tax them 20 or 25%, that is only $16,000 or $15,000 left a year they have left over to survive. They are now on the fringes of poverty. They already barely made enough to survive. Now the government puts them just below the mark where they straight up do not have enough to survive. However, for the average rich person who makes about $250,000 or $500,000 or even $1 million, 20 to 25%, well, that's still a huge chunk of their money. They make so much of it that without that huge chunk, they can still live that luxurious and very comfortable lifestyle that they meant to attain in the first place with that money. And it's something that would have much more minimal effects than on your average poor person. So the flat tax only cripples the poor / the working class, the middle class, but it's yet another concession to the rich, and that is why Ben Carson is advocating for it. He wants to pander to the rich and leave the poor and the middle class out to rot. Now, the final stop on the Ben Carson lunacy tour is foreign policy. Now, the Republican Party is a baboon tribe, as we all know, and Ben Carson politically is no different. That includes on foreign policy. You should hear the things this guy says talking about foreign affairs. He's already a lunatic inside our own borders. Well, you already know he's outright deranged on issues outside the U.S., so let's get the scoop. Here is Ben Carson speaking at an NRA event, the National Rifle Association, and listen to this, quite frankly, horrifying language that he uses.
We think about people from Honduras and Mexico and places like that coming in, but, you know, there are people who are watching us. They're all over this world. They're called radical extremists, Islamic terrorists, and they are going to get in here any way that they can. And when they get here, we need to be able to fight them, particularly if we have an administration that won't fight them. We have to be able to fight them ourselves.
Listen to Ben Carson, everybody. Arm yourself against the Muslim terrorists. Oh, they're knocking on the doorstep. They're in Canada. We found a Quran on the Mexican border. ISIS is knocking on our door, ready to barge in. Oh, yeah, so buy a gun to fight against those devilish Muslim terrorists. Ben Carson is a joke, man. Here's Ben Carson's genius on display again, talking about the rules of war.
And our military needs to know that they're not going to be prosecuted when they come back because somebody has said you did something that was politically incorrect. There is no such thing as a politically correct war. We need to grow up. We need to mature. If you're going to have rules for war, you should just have a rule that says no war. Other than that, you know, we have to win.
Wait, hold on. So rules of war shouldn't apply to the United States? It doesn't matter if we kill in absurd numbers of civilians, people who have nothing to do with the conflicts. It doesn't matter if you enter these conflicts for ridiculous reasons and you kill upwards of millions of people for no reason at all. See, that is the thing. When you enter extreme displays of violence such as war, if you don't try to contain and regulate that violence in some way, shape, or form, you are looking at a terrible situation in which there are people killed who should not be killed, and there is damage that should not be inflicted. Your goal in war should be to minimize the effects as much as possible and focus on damaging your target, not senseless violence. This guy is running for president. He believes being gay is a choice because people enter prison straight and leave gay. Brazen logic by Ben Carson. He believes abortions are human sacrifice. I'm not joking. Look it up. He believes we should instate a flat tax which panders to the rich and hurts the poor and the middle class. And when presented with this reality, we find out he believes he can pick and choose facts that are correct and incorrect, and he can disagree with those incorrect facts. He wants America to arm itself against those creepy Muslim terrorists with even more guns because ISIS is knocking on our doorstep halfway across the world. And at last, but certainly not least, he believes rules of war do not apply to the United States. This crazy lunatic is trying to become the leader of the free world. Allow me to give you my vote, a sweet and resounding heck to the no. And hopefully after this smear, you all feel the same.